Welcome to Table Talk here at the Philadelphia Sports Table Podcast Show, the longest running weekly Philly sports podcast show in the world. In about a month, folks, it's going to be 13 years of doing this podcast. If you're listening to us on whatever audio podcast platform you're on, thanks so much for sticking around after all these years. Longtime listeners, we appreciate you. And if you're new, stick around, subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, we got a great guest. You're seeing his delightful face right now as we're going to be diving into some NFL offseason storylines from predominantly orange over at Fansided. We've got our good friend, Lou Scataglia. My friend, thanks so much for jumping on here this week.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. And I definitely won't tell you how old I was 13 years ago.
Oh, God. I know. Dude, I just had a physical today. Pull back the curtain. I just had a physical. Everything's fine. Everything's great. But my 48-year-old body is not feeling like it was 13 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah, and you do look like a young pup. Everybody, head on over to YouTube.
Yes. Trying to age gracefully.
Absolutely. We need to, especially as we follow our teams here in the NFL. You being a Broncos fan, we're going to get into the Broncos for sure. Going to get into a little Eagles talk as well as we're following some of these NFL storylines. But Lou, to start us off, talking about free agency here, been a ton of moves that teams have made in free agency so far this season. The Broncos, and we'll get to them in a bit, a team that you write about specifically over at Predominantly Orange, they haven't been too active. The Eagles haven't been like too active either, quite frankly. But some teams have certainly gotten better at some positions. Some have made some questionable moves, in my opinion. What do you think has been the biggest theme of free agency thus far from more of that macro perspective here in the NFL?
Yeah, I think a lot of front offices convince themselves that they are maybe only a few moves away. And I say that because I think there has been a lack of patience in terms of rebuilding among teams and front offices. I think now the NFL is kind of like a microwave society where we want like immediate production. And I can even go back to the Broncos as an example. 2024, we shocked the world. Bo Nix, 10-7 playoffs. 2 years prior, we were the laughingstock of the NFL. Same with the Commanders. 2024, one game within the Super Bowl. The year prior, they were a laughingstock. So I think a lot of front offices see how some of these teams even the Vikings just quietly won 9 games last year. It's ridiculous. I think a lot of these front offices see how, maybe not how easy, but how quickly teams can just all of a sudden win games and get into the playoffs. And I think they convince themselves, hey, if we go out and fill X, Y, and Z position in free agency, then we're going to be good. Obviously, as you know, that leads to overpaying. Jalen Phillips is a perfect example.
I was just going to say the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers are the quintessential team that you're talking about right now. They got into the playoffs amazingly enough in that division last year, and now they are paying all these guys, and I don't know if they're actually a better team.
Yeah, I think specifically the Devin Lloyd contract was pretty solid for them in terms of the per year value. But generally speaking, I think oh my gosh, even the Bears, just 11 wins in the division out of the blue. So again, I think there is a general consensus across the NFL and front offices that success and rebuilding or retooling can happen quicker than it used to happen. Even go back to Josh Allen. He stunk his first 2 years, but he was developing.
Yeah.
They had to be patient with him. And then, all of a sudden, 2020, his third year, he was an MVP candidate. There's no one correct way to rebuild in today's NFL, but I do think we're seeing front offices just kind of, just get aggressive. And with the cap exploding, I just think that it's a lot more of a free-for-all now than it was maybe even, 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's a good answer, a free-for-all for sure. And one team that really hasn't been in that free-for-all type of mode is the team that you cover over at predominantlyorange.com, the Denver Broncos. And man, I follow you on Twitter, and actually let folks know where they can follow you on the Twitters or online out there before we get into this here, Lou.
Sure. So I'm active on Twitter, Lou Scataglia, P-O. So my first and last name, then the letters P-O for Predominantly Orange. I post a lot, pretty much 99% Broncos at this point.
Yeah. I know Lou wasn't a fan of the Eagles and Jalen Hurts' contract. That's a story for another time. I saw that tweet and I was like, whoa. Whoa, what the heck is it? What's going on here?
Right.
But you have not been happy on the Twitters, and I've refused to call it X. You've not been happy on the Twitters with regard to the Broncos in terms of
Yeah.
their free agency, calling it a massive failure as well, Lou. You
Mhm.
know that the team had a number of players, of course, extended last year, but that's not what many within Broncos Nation are really disappointed about
Mm-mm.
at this point in free agency. As Denver is certainly one of the top and top contending and top tiered teams in the NFL heading into this 2026 season.
Yeah.
What are fans not happy about when it comes to free agency with this team?
So there are two sides to this discussion. The first side is you win 14 games, the number one seed, and you probably make the Super Bowl if Bo Nix doesn't blow up his ankle.
Right.
So of course the front office wants to run it back with the same players. That is a perfectly fine way to think. I'm not, people can think what they want. I respect people that think that way. The other side of this is you just won 14 games, the number one seed, and your quarterback, snapped his ankle because he had to run the ball more because, you didn't do enough in the run game. But the idea here is, you got so close. Why not make a few moves to just get over the edge?
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about spending $30 million a year on Jalen Phillips. I'm talking about being strategically aggressive. Like, maybe Travis Etienne at $13 million is worth it. Maybe Caden Ellis, who is a linebacker that has a brother on the Broncos. Maybe Caden Ellis, I forget how much he got per year, maybe like 10, 11 million a year. Maybe he's worth it to fill a need in the linebacker room. So I'm not mad that the Broncos haven't spent $250 million, in guaranteed money in free agency. But my frustration lies with you've literally brought back like everybody. But to make matters worse, the roster's gotten worse. Dre Greenlaw got cut. John Franklin Myers went to the Titans.
Yeah.
We were never going to re-sign him. But not only are you bringing a lot of bad players back, but you also did see talent go out the door. So I think this strategy was just kind of way too conservative given the situation that we're in. NFL teams very rarely have everything lining up at once with a good quarterback on his rookie deal and a good head coach and a good front office. That happens like once every 20 years for NFL teams. To have
Right.
all three lined up and to get to this point, it doesn't happen. I might have to wait another 20 years as a fan to enjoy this type of success again outside of what our window could be going forward. So I believe we should have been more opportunistically aggressive. For example, I think, throwing whatever the contract was to Devin Lloyd, I thought Devin Lloyd would have been a great get for us because we have liabilities at linebacker. But obviously the frustration is just generally speaking, the aggression was, just not there. And I thought it needed to be there.
And I would agree with you because of what this division is and how the Broncos really can take advantage of certain teams that really haven't been performing well within this AFC West division. And we're going to get to one of those teams as we close out this discussion this week here on our Table Talk interview show. But as we look at another team that we specifically follow here at the Philadelphia Sports Table Podcast Show, the Philadelphia Eagles, and their re-signing of tight end Dallas Goedert over the weekend. I was very happy about this re-signing. Yes, it's a 1-year deal, and there was an initial agreement, which we all thought was very interesting, to move Goddard's void date twice, in fact, which prevented him from really hitting the free agent market. Didn't seem that the tight end market really was going to be of benefit to Goddard, even though, if he were to go out on the open market, we don't know what would have actually happened, but tight end market just really bizarre. Darren Waller still out there available. David Njoku, tight ends available, and still have not, as of us recording this, as far as I'm aware, have not been picked up yet. So I'm just wondering, Lou, what are your thoughts about this storyline with Dallas Goedert and just how the tight end free agent market has really looked like this offseason? I think it's a pretty interesting storyline.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, the free agent market at tight end this offseason hasn't been too shocking. I mean, you saw players like Isaiah Likely follow his old coach John Harbaugh to the Giants. I thought that was a logical move. I do think you saw some pretty shockingly big contracts for guys like Daniel Bellinger and Charlie Kohler.
Yeah.
Really pretty much exclusively blocking guys that are getting $8, $9, $10 million a year. I thought that was a bit much. We re-signed Adam Troutman about $6 million a year. Pretty much just a guy, but I guess that's the going rate for average to mediocre tight ends now, $6, $7, $8 million a year, which seems like a lot of money. I also think there's another layer to this. This is now the second year in a row that the NFL draft seems to be pretty deep at tight end. And in today's NFL, it is kind of rare to have a true inline tight end who can block and who can also catch passes at a high level. You just don't really find those prospects. So, coming into the NFL, you usually have a group of tight ends that have upside as a receiver but can't block, or tight ends that don't have much upside as a receiver but can block.
Right.
There are a few prospects this year that are a little bit of both. And I do think there are a lot of teams that have taken note of that and realized that they could probably get a future starting tight end in the third or fourth, maybe even fifth rounds. It, to add another layer to this, tight end is a position that it can kind of wear on you, especially the tight ends that are asked to block frequently, and then they have to go out wide and try and catch a pass. So a lot of these tight ends do have more tread on the tires than you think, because they are effectively an extra offensive lineman and a receiver. So
yeah,
I'm not too surprised that the market still has some names out there. I think in the coming days, they're going to start to come off the board. But I think the draft being so deep at the position is probably a main reason why, the market maybe hasn't been what people thought it was or was going to be.
Yeah, it's so bizarre with regard to Dallas Goedert here in Philadelphia, because I think us Eagles fans over the decades have actually been so spoiled at the tight end position. We can go back to a gentleman named Brent Selleck, who was just a solid tight end, catching the ball, blocking as well. Zach Ertz and what he was as still what he is able to do in the NFL. I mean, given the injury that he had towards the end of this past season, and with Dallas Goedert, a passing tight end, or I'm sorry, a catching, he's able to catch the ball basically wherever on the field. His blocking, fantastic. Up until this past year, it was a little rough, but I think we've been so spoiled with that within Eagles Nation that we kind of saw this tight end situation playing out in a weird way. I think your analysis, though, is spot on for sure. And again, folks, we are talking to Lou Scataglia from predominantly orange.com. He's site expert over there, and also the NFL Spin Zone as well. I'm correct in that, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Oh, awesome. Well, folks, we're going to take a break. And when we get back, we got a lot more discussion with Lou on the NFL, some storylines that we've been following here at the Philadelphia Sports Table Podcast Show, storylines that they've been following over predominantly orange as well. We're going to be back in just a bit. All right, folks, we're back, and we are with our good friend Lou Scataglia from predominantlyorange.com over at Fansided. And Lou, I gotta be honest. I'm hesitant to bring up this next storyline in particular because I don't like the guy.
Yeah.
I don't like his persona, but I just wonder when the guy is actually going to retire and we're going to be done with him. And I'm talking about one Aaron Rodgers. I mean, he's still available in free agency for a reason.
Yeah.
He's always out there just kind of lingering around. Last year he finished 31st out of 33 in qualified passer success rate. Last year, it's just amazing to me that he's still considered a viable quarterback here in the NFL. I think he's cooked. He's hanging on by a thread here. What are your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers, this storyline, where he may go, or better yet, where he even maybe should or should not go? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I have a little bit of a different take on Aaron Rodgers.
Okay.
I think he's going to either play for the Steelers or retire. I think that's a pretty easy thing to see. Reunite with Mike McCarthy for a year or retire. I could see it both ways. I thought Rodgers was fine in 2025. I thought he was, a perfectly fine, 20th best quarterback in the league. He never throws a lot of picks. He's always going to be pretty accurate. Obviously, he can't move like he used to, but I do think it would actually benefit the Steelers if he came back for a year. The main reason why is because it would give the Steelers another year of runway to try to figure out a long-term quarterback situation. That's really the big thing with the Steelers. They have ceilinged out these past few years.
Yeah.
With 9-8, 9-7-1, 10-7, 10-7, just because they have farted around with the quarterback position for too long. Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. I remember. So I live in Pittsburgh. My barber's a Steelers fan. When the Steelers were like 10-2 or 10-3 a couple years ago, my barber was talking them up, and I'm like, "You just wait. Give it a few weeks." Right. We gave it a few weeks. Guess what happened?
Yeah.
So I know that the Steelers, take a lot of pride in, we're never going to rebuild. We're always going to try and win football games. That's fine. Every team probably thinks that, but there comes a time where you do kind of have to rebuild. However, if you do hit on a quarterback, 70% of your other issues go away overnight. So I think Rodgers returning does give them more of a runway to say, all right, how do we finally lay the groundwork for a long-term quarterback? Is it Ty Simpson in the draft? Is it Carson Beck or Nussmeier? Do we
Yeah.
stockpile picks? Um, I think if Rodgers came back, he would be fine. He'd have a 93 passer rating. He'd throw 25 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. I think mentally he still knows how to play the game at a very high level. Obviously, physically he is pretty much over the hill.
Yeah.
But I think he could be a viable option in Pittsburgh for one more season for sure.
My thoughts with Pittsburgh and their quarterback situation is, I mean, it's kind of similar to what you're talking about. You need to have a veteran presence, I think, there
Mhm.
for this next season so that whoever you bring on board, whether it's a current backup who you may see as having the talent to be a number one quarterback, or if you're going to draft someone that they can go through that mentoring process
Mhm.
throughout the next year. And I'm actually looking at a guy like Kirk Cousins to be able to do that. Kirk Cousins is not going to get you to the Super Bowl. He's probably not even going to get you to the playoffs, but he's going to be able to help in terms of that bridge year with whoever the quarterback of the future is going to be, to say, you know what, I'm going to be a pretty damn good mentor. I'm a decent human being. I'm not somebody who's all about myself. At least that's what we've gotten to know with Kirk Cousins over all these years he's been in the NFL. I personally like a Kirk Cousins type of situation instead of Aaron Rodgers. And again, like you said, Aaron Rodgers, he's been there. He's been in Pittsburgh for the year. He's got Mike McCarthy, that reuniting storyline as well. That wouldn't go anywhere. But I personally like Kirk Cousins. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've actually always really liked Kirk Cousins. I think he's one of the more underrated quarterbacks of this generation, to be completely honest with you. In his prime, he was nice in his prime. I never thought he was going to get you to a Super Bowl. I wanted the Broncos to sign him in 2018, and then he went to the Vikings. We signed Case Keenum, and it was just ridiculous. I think Kirk Cousins could be a viable option. I think he probably has another year or two left in the tank.
Yeah.
Another year removed from that Achilles injury. AFC North football, Kirk Cousins, limp noodle arm, not really going to run, make any plays. I don't know how that works, but if you told me it was Kirk Cousins and then the Steelers drafted Ty Simpson and they tried that for a year, I think that could be a viable solution.
Yeah.
Right? You're never going to find a franchise quarterback until you try to draft one. And they usually come in the first round. So,
Perhaps. Yeah, you never know. You never know. But I mean, to dovetail off this discussion here about the quarterback position, I think it begs the question about what certain teams are going to be doing with the quarterback position in this offseason and even well into the future. I'm talking about the Steelers, the Dolphins, the Cardinals, of course, the lowly Jets as well. I'm just amazed at here in 2026 that there are NFL teams that are still floundering about the long-term vision of the quarterback position. It's not easy getting that quarterback. Bo Nix, not easy necessarily hitting on the quarterback. Jalen Hurts, not necessarily, easy to hit on the quarterback of the future and just kind of lucking into certain talent as well in the draft, which quite frankly, the Eagles did. Given what you think about Jalen Hurts and his productivity on the field, that he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback at this point.
Yeah.
There are certainly other quarterbacks that have gotten lucky as well, that have been drafted late in later rounds, whether we're talking about the old Tom Brady's, Dak Prescott, even the type of quarterback he is. He was a fourth round pick. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on these teams that just continue to flounder at the quarterback position that can't get it right here? What are you thinking here? It's 2026, man.
Yeah, right. Well, I do think, a few years ago when Baker Mayfield all of a sudden played super well with the Buccaneers and has kind of sustained that for a few years, I think that opened up a new layer to this quarterback thing. And then Sam Darnold in 2024 out of nowhere. And then Daniel Jones for half a year this year. So I think there's another new element of, can we find the next Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Daniel Jones reclamation project out of the woodwork? I mean, for goodness sake, Sam Darnold just helped his team win a Super Bowl this year.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. And he was never really, I still think he's probably the 12th best quarterback in the NFL, but I mean, he won a Super Bowl. So I think there are teams now, maybe we can sign a Malik Willis for a couple years and he'll end up being, the 2026 version of what we previously saw. At the end of the day, though, that's not really a viable solution. And as I said a few minutes ago, you have to draft and develop. You have to draft quarterback, develop him, likely in the first round. And I think teams should take multiple shots and draft picks a year until they find the guy. I understand that you at least need to be competent enough at the position. So like the Jets swinging a trade for Geno Smith, I get it to an extent that like you need someone who can throw the ball down the field a few times a game. Obviously, we all know that the Jets and Dolphins aren't trying to win football games this year. Same with the Cardinals. We know that they're not trying to win football games, but you also just can't really like openly tank in the NFL. It's just not something that
Yeah.
happens. We all know that those teams are kind of tanking for 2027
Yeah.
because it always seems like the next year is going to be really deep at quarterback in the NFL draft. That actually seems to be the case in 2027.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to mask it with, well, if we trade for Geno Smith for a year, and then he stinks. It's like, oh, shucks. Well, we tried, but we have the third overall pick, and we're going to get, Arch Manning or Lenora Sellers or somebody else. But I also think a lot of these teams are holding out a little bit of hope that maybe their Malik Willis can become the next Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, well, look at us. We look like geniuses. And
Right.
if it doesn't work out, they get a top pick. They get a nice young quarterback. And it's like, wow, look, we're geniuses.
Yep, absolutely.
So, but it's a mess. And I'm glad that my team figured it out. And I don't have to wonder and type articles about if my team should sign Malik Willis because I would go insane.
Yeah, absolutely. I would as well. Thankfully, both of our teams are still top contenders within their conferences here.
Thank goodness.
Yes. But Lou, to close us out here, I'd like to get your thoughts on a huge rival of the Broncos, and that is the Kansas City Chiefs. And if and how they might reload this coming offseason here. Look, I think the Eagles ended up taking the soul out of the Kansas City Chiefs 2 Super Bowls ago, and they just haven't been the same since. Are the Chiefs going to be kind of walking? I like to use this phrase a lot on this podcast platform. Are they going to be walking through the desert for some time, or will they actually be able to reload this offseason and compete again in the AFC West?
Yeah, their roster has gotten worse this offseason, and I don't see a lot of people talking about it. I think the Chiefs did something very smart. They made a splash signing for Kenneth Walker, and that's like all everyone's been talking about. Oh, Patrick Mahomes, and the Chiefs finally have a running game. Trent McDuffie's gone. Brian Cook, a really underrated safety, is gone. Jalen Watson, a really good cornerback, is gone. Leo Chenal, a really good linebacker, is gone. The offensive line probably still needs another starter. Travis Kelce is old, fat, and washed, and their receivers are I don't know what the heck. I still think this roster is a ways away. And just because the Chiefs signed Kenneth Walker doesn't mean that their front office is any different. Brett Veach has been pretty poor in the draft in recent years. The defensive line outside of a declining Chris Jones isn't that special. This just isn't a very good team right now. I remember last year I did some season predictions for the 2025 season. I had predicted the Chiefs to go 12-5 and finish second in the AFC West to the Broncos. And I thought that was me drinking the orange Kool-Aid. But, oh, my goodness, I was not hard enough on them. Right now, I think this roster has gotten a little bit worse. And then we also have to talk about Mahomes' knee injury.
Yeah.
An ACL injury is major. Even if he's on the field for week 1, there's no guarantee he's going to be 100%.
Yeah.
So, there is so much going on here that, I still think, the Chiefs have a lot of roster holes. I would go as far as to say that the roster does kind of stink at this point. I don't necessarily see them being a threat this year unless they absolutely ace the draft and they get a bunch of immediate contributors and they somehow find some gems with these next few waves of free agency. But, I don't want to seem arrogant because my team won the division for the first time in a decade, but I am not worried about the Chiefs. I'm not. I'm sorry. We swept them last year.
I'm with you. Yep.
We, in since the start of 2023, I think we've lost to them twice, and the one was on a last-second blocked field goal where we were in a position to win. So, I think the tide is turning in the AFC West. I kind of think it's us, and then a little bit of a teardrop, and then the Chargers, and then a little bit of a teardrop, and then the Chiefs, and then you got to dig down about 18 miles, and then you can put the Raiders.
Right, exactly. Great way to end our discussion here about these NFL offseason storylines. Again, folks, Lou Scataglia from predominantlyorange.com. over at Fansided. My friend, it's always great talking to you. Love our conversations. Come back and join us down the road. I'd love to have you back on.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's always a good time.